I recognize that I am a man who identifies and presents feminine. I am not a woman, and I fully accept that. I do not seek to bring down or invade any real womanhood in any way, shape, or manner. In fact, I stand with most of you guys and most of your positions regarding the transgender movement. And I think that this is an important start on your podcast to bring that point forth. I also want to talk about the children because I think they are more than even women themselves, the most important aspect of the gender identity movement that we need to understand and protect.
Welcome everyone to From the Heart, Voice of a Conservative American Woman. I'm Ruth Ann Hogue and I'm your host. Today we're going to talk about a recent and very important decision from the highest court in our country, the Supreme Court. This case is called United States v. Skrmetti. It's all about a law in Tennessee concerning medical care for young people. And today we have a truly remarkable guest joining us, someone who embodies both strength and a singular viewpoint on a critical topic. We're honored to introduce Kristy Pandora. Kristi is a powerful voice who's been a transgender activist since 2015, appearing on numerous podcasts and legacy media shows, sharing her insights and advocating for what she believes in. Born Christopher, Kristi has been living authentically as herself, a transgender woman, since 2010. Originally from the rich history of New England, spending some of her time in Connecticut and then later in Rhode Island. She now thrives in her feminine identity in Alabama. Whereabouts in Alabama, Kristi?
I live in the Huntsville area, a town called Athens, right outside Huntsville, northern Alabama.
Kristi brings a unique perspective to our conversation today, especially regarding the Supreme Court's recent decision on gender-affirming care for minors. She firmly believes in protecting minors from medical treatments they may not be mature enough to fully understand, and she stands in support of parents who wish to shield their children from what she refers to as the dark side of the rainbow. Kristi is a passionate advocate for showcasing the rich diversity within the transgender community to society, while maintaining that children should remain separate from certain aspects of this discussion. It's a privilege to have her here to shed light on this nuanced and often misunderstood subject. Welcome, Kristi.
Thank you, welcome. And one thing I do want to start off with, because of your particular podcast, is I want to say is I recognize that I am a man who identifies and presents feminine. I am not a woman, and I'm never going to plug a square peg into that round hole. I fully accept that. I appreciate the way that you've introduced me, but I'm much mature along my transition, and I do not seek to try to bring down or invade any real womanhood in any way, shape, or manner. In fact, I stand with most of you guys and most of your positions regarding the transgender movement. And I think that this is an important start on your podcast to bring that point forth. I also want to talk about the children because I think they are more than even women themselves, the most important aspect of the gender identity movement that we need to understand and protect.
Thank you. And thank you for clarifying that. I felt it would be better to have you do that than have me to try to explain it. I wanted people to hear it from you. So thank you so much. And briefly setting us up, today's topic takes us back to 2023 when Tennessee passed a law called SB 1, Senate Bill 1. And this law stops doctors and other healthcare providers from giving certain types of medical treatments like puberty blockers or hormones to minors. And that means anyone under 18. If those treatments are meant to help them change their gender identity or deal with discomfort about their biological sex. However, the law does allow these treatments for other medical reasons if a child has a birth defect or a disease, which I think is important to mention because sometimes there may be other reasons for it, and we certainly wouldn't want to prevent that from happening. So, Kristi, as a transgender woman, what was your initial reaction when you heard about this specific Tennessee law? And then subsequently when the Supreme Court decision came to uphold it?
When this law came out, it's kind of a step up from a law they passed in 2021 when they went after the puberty blockers for children, which I supported as well. When I heard that they were supporting this in Tennessee, this is something that I got behind and actually stood in front of the state legislator because I absolutely understood that we need to protect the children. That's just my personal opinion and my view as someone who is born with gender dysphoria that's gone through the transition. And for us to continue this conversation, if we're going to have this podcast, it's going to be very complex, and we need to understand. When they say transgender, we need to understand what transgender is itself. Transgender is kind of like an ideological trap word. It's an umbrella term for anybody that is not living their authentic sexual gender, the birth sex that they were born as, and for any deviance from that would fall under umbrella term of transgender. So that consists of people who do have the medical condition. The medical condition which we're talking about is gender dysphoria. That is only a small subsector of the entire transgender movement. Transgender itself is a pseudo-religious ideological social construct redesign of gender and sexuality, which has appropriated the medical condition of gender dysphoria. And this is one of the main reasons I've been very excited to try to get behind this legislation, see the Supreme Court back that up, because the far left took the medical condition over the past 15, 20 years, they appropriated it, and they put a lot of misinformation under the term transgender. There's a lot of confusion of what that may be because of the amount of diversity that's underneath that umbrella. So when you say transgender, for example, when they tried to pass transgender laws under the Biden administration under Title IX, they did it under sexual discrimination, meaning that male and female, two sexes, it's a binary system. The social construct redesign of gender and sexuality that I speak of is the pseudo-religious ideological social construct. That is that gender is not reflective of the birth sex in any way, shape, or form. That gender is on a spectrum, a multitude of expressionisms that are not reflective of the birth sex in any way, shape, or form. So it takes birth sex definitive out of gender expression and puts it into a place of free will. Now, I'm not against people believing that, but that's an ideology I do not believe in. I personally believe that sex-based gender is binary of male and female, that we are created of this way. And as someone who's been in this transition now, who was born with gender dysphoria, I do not accept the ideology which umbrellas over me. So that's how I may differ from a lot of transgender people. And I want everyone to understand when we speak of transgender, this is a smoke show, a sleight of hand that the far left has tried to use by using this terminology transgender. What they've been doing is taking a pseudo-religious ideological social construct and running under the guise of identity politics and pretty much controlling the information used in social media algorithms, censorship, and institutional propaganda in order to try to push their narrative into one direction, leaving the most of the public kind of confused and blind and thinking that, and selling the aspect that transgender people, again, that term, the umbrella, are just victims to society, when in fact it's a social engineering conquest to change the social dynamics of gender and sexuality for the entire human race.
That's a fascinating perspective, Kristi. Many people might expect a transgender person to oppose laws restricting gender affirming care for minors. Can you explain why you supported Tennessee's position overall?
Because I understood the importance of what they were really attacking, and that was the deception within the terminology, going into the Title IX and sexual discrimination. Again, the goal of the social construct redesign is to break down the binary system completely, using, again, identity politics and propaganda. When I learned that Jack Johnson and Mark Lamberth were working and teaming up to create this bill, I became very excited, and of course, I wanted to support this. Not only that, someone who's going through this, I understand I was born with gender dysphoria. I struggled through this in my personal journey my entire life. But it takes an adult decision to become who you are. What they're doing, after we spend 10 to 15 years of heavy indoctrination to our youth into this new ideological social construct, they might try to sell the gender dysphoria on one end, but on the other end, they're bringing in this social construct, this ideology, and they are indoctrinating children into a belief system. That gender, so sex-based, put it this way, sex-based, when you are born as sex, that is a lifetime characteristic you cannot shake. I can take pills, I can mimic, I can look, I can present different, but I can never be. And the ideology is it's different. It's trying to sell people that they can be something that they're not, put a square peg into a round hole. And if not, they're going to be a victim. And I see that as very problematic. To my people, from my people's position, I believe it cuts off the ability to truly self-love and to self-accept, and also the diagnostic aspect of who's truly transgender and who's not. We're now in 2025. This isn't what it was when gender came out. We're now at a point, if you go on social media, you're on TikTok, you're on Facebook, you're going to see transgender people themselves coming out and saying that people who are born transmedicalists or with gender dysphoria don't really have a say. They're just a small faction of the society. That it's an ideological adoption. So we have a pseudo-religious ideology running under the guise of identity politics being mixed in with medicine, and that's something that's very tragic. Again, this is an adult decision. So I go back my own decision. Had I gone on transition as a young age, if my parents had let me, which never would have happened, but had they let me and raised me up, I would have transitioned into my age now, and I'd always be wondering whether or not I was the other end. So you have to go through puberty as your born self to understand truly your body, your mentality, your psyche, your spirituality. Every aspect of you as a human needs to go through the entire balance to figure out who you are truthfully. You take that away from a kid, they're in trouble. And I think that's going to cause a lot more depression, a lot more issues within the trans community as they grow older. And not only that, can anyone show me any type of medical studies where we're looking 2, 3, 4 decades down the road with anybody who's been transgender, who's had access to hormone replacement therapy, who's had access to these surgeries, who's been living for that long? What are the long-term effects of this? These are things that I myself, I've been on HRT now for 15 years. These are things that I worry about. I'm having issues with bone loss, bone density. I've struggled with my own emotional status, putting hormones into my body and what that did to my relationships and my family. These are true issues that they're not selling. They're pretty much taking elective surgery and elective medicine, pushing it out there as affirmative care, and taking away self-love and self-acceptance. And so to do that to a child, I think is probably the most horrifying thing that I could ever imagine. And as someone who's lived through this process, I feel it's my responsibility to stand up to defend them.
Thank you. And I appreciate that. I met Chloe at one of the America rallies that was here in Arizona. And she's one that has reversed, she
Yes.
detransitioned and she's been making it on the circuit. She turned 18 and then realized this wasn't for her. She had gone male. Having been able to meet you virtually online and then meeting Chloe in person, she started really young and wound up regretting it. You've chosen this as an adult, and this is who you are, and I respect you for that. And I respect Chloe for making her decision, 18, to say, hey, what happened here? And we don't really have the studies for it. But that brings me back to some of these transgender young people. There's a hashtag, trans kids exist, trans kids are real, all of that.
I don't believe there are such things as a trans kid.
Thank
Because
you.
you could put me up against a far left social justice trans advocate right now, and the two of us could debate. I'm going to tell you, neither one of us are going to agree on what the social construct of what gender should be for us adults, even us in the trans community. So if us as adults within the trans community can't agree on the social construct of what gender is, then how's a kid gonna?
There's a whole lot of nuances with all of that. We had a doctor challenging this law in Tennessee, from what I understand, saying it was unfair and that it violated the children's rights or the parents' rights. A lower court initially put a stop to parts of the law, but then a higher court said that the law was okay. And then the Supreme Court stepped in to decide if Tennessee's law was constitutional. And on Wednesday, the Supreme Court ultimately decided that Tennessee's law, which prohibits certain medical treatments for transgender minors, does not unfairly discriminate and is therefore allowed under the Constitution. This means the law can stand as it is, and it's a significant decision. It's something that impacts many families and continues the conversation around gender affirming care.
People are awakening at this point in time in history, and this is why these discussions are important. I fully support as well the RFK and what the Health and Human Resources report came out with a few weeks ago. I'm not sure if you read that, but I invite everyone to do so. There's been a lot of trans people who have been around for a while who are advocating for this. And what it is, we understand that this is a process and this is a life-changing process, and that the diagnostics are not happening correctly. When I first came out well over 15 years ago, I had to live as Kristi for well over a year before I was offered any type of medication or affirmative care. I had to go through intensive psychoanalyzation, and it was much different than it is today. It's so lax today, they've turned it into a farm and they mixed the ideology in, and they've taken away the diagnostic of it. Now, the Health and Human Resources report wants to continue to go back towards that. Go back towards the diagnostic aspect, take a lot of the federal funding away from the affirmative care and go back to the diagnostic self-love and self-acceptance. Because what's happening now, and detransitioners like Chloe are proof of this, is that people who are not truly born with gender dysphoria are getting caught up into the mix and given life-changing, body-changing, social-changing medications, affirmative care. And again, this is ideological more than it is medical. And we need to recognize the truth of that.
I kind of wonder how things would have gone if this would have been a thing when I was a kid, because I had two older brothers. I was the first girl in the family, and they got all the cool stuff. They got bikes, I got a wagon. They got Hot Wheels, I got Barbies. Not that I didn't like my Barbies, but I wanted the Hot Wheels too. But now you do something like that, and I might have had a school teacher pull me aside and try to turn me into something that I'm not. So
Exactly.
that's what's scary to me, is because we are growing up in a time where kids can have questions about things. And I thought, I'm going to grow up and be like my dad. I'm going to be an executive and have this big desk and be in charge. And at the time, that was what men did. Women were nurses, women were teachers, the whole deal. Just
And there's a reason why it didn't exist back then, though. And that reason's because social media didn't exist. And the
true.
biggest building tool set of the gender identity movement has been the ability for them to censor opposition and indoctrinate their ideology through use of social media information. And that's pretty much the main cause of this. Mix that in with big pharma and money and socialized medicine, and boom, we have what we have today.
That makes a lot of sense because they can go straight to the kids.
On top of that, we don't have a lot of protections for detransitioners. You go through, you get on this stuff, you're incorrectly diagnosed, you form the system. There's no mechanism for us to go ahead and just sue providers. And why is that? Why can't we go for malpractice on the diagnostic end? These are some of the questions as a trans person in the community many of us have had. And again, this is why I have very little faith in the affirmative care and where the direction this has gone. Not only through my own personal experiences, but I've had many friends I've gone through this, and some who actually suffered gender dysphoria who've gone through some of the process and really have issues and regrets in doing so. And for them to not have that mechanism is again, it's who's that protecting? Are they really protecting trans people, or are they protecting their own profit margins and sociological designs? And that's
Yeah.
exactly what it is, and why I feel like I need to step up and help defend children.
I see that some of these kids are starting to fight back and they're speaking out and they're filing lawsuits. So there is a movement to get that change so that they can, if their rights were violated as a minor, they weren't old enough to consent to any of this. Their brains aren't fully developed until what, 25, they say?
Yep.
So if your frontal cortex isn't even fully developed until 25, they won't let you get a tattoo until you're 18. You can't drink till you're 21. How can you decide that your sex is different when you're 3 or 4 or 5 or 15? It's just,
No.
it blows the mind.
And one important fact we haven't mentioned in this podcast, and I think a lot of people from the position of anti-trans healthcare for minors would be the fact that it will sterilize these children going up into adulthood. So it's going to be taking their families, their future families away from them. How many relationships? What does that do to their life overall when they look back totally forward? This is not a little decision. This is huge.
Yeah.
And if they can make it as an adult, it's not a decision for life. It's a decision until they're adult enough to make the decision. I don't see why this is an argument. This particular Supreme Court decision was very excited to me. It was a signal of where the pendulum is swinging, because one of the biggest deceptive moves was, again, to go under the guise of discrimination against Title IX. That is sex-based discrimination. They want to use the medical aspect of this within the binary system, but at the same time, under the term transgender, they want to bring in the new social construct ideology deceptively and try to whitewash it and kind of, again, it's inclusion but invasion at the same time, taken over completely. And so for them to not be able to make that move sociologically, politically, and legally, it roadblocks the transgender movement in a huge way that I don't think a lot of people truly understand. Because once that deception is not a pathway to do so, they have to be more open with the fact that this is not just a medical condition, this is also an ideological social construct redesign. So it
Yes.
exposes them. That's why they're so upset with the Trump administration over the past, what's 2 terms in the past 10 years. It's the fact that they have interrupted what they needed to politically get done and set in stone in order for them to progress and take over completely. And that's not happening. It needs to come to a place of true equal rights for all. That's what I hope. I hope one day that the transgender movement can be truly truthful and recognize itself as a ideology or like a religious ideology under law and be placed under separation of church and state. If someone wants to believe whatever they want to believe, they should be able to do it in their own corner. They shouldn't be able to force that on other people, go after their children, indoctrinate other children. And that's where we're getting into a crazy, crazy place. And also, I want to
Yes.
say this in 2023, we need to remember when this law came out, I want to say the excitement, how quickly all the news, when we forget. 2023, the transgender community was actively being gaslighted by the Biden administration and the far left, completely burning down the movement as I knew it, and pushing this pseudo-religious, this far left ideology as best as they could. They were actively going in front of children, actively doing the drag queens stuff in front of them, going into
Yes.
schools. They were gloating about it, and they were gaslighting the American populace. And so we cannot forget the far left part in all this legislation come to fruition. And seeing now that they're going after Title IX, I'm also seeing things like what happened in Colorado. We also have a case now that's challenging what I really believe the conservative movement needs to laser focus on, are
Okay.
challenges to religious freedom. And that's where I think this will really open up wide and bring it to a place of equal rights. Because once it's exposed that this is an ideological, pseudo-religious ideology, we can recognize that and kind of put barriers within law there. We kind of stop the weaponization of the movement.
Okay.
And that's kind of where I'm seeing this whole thing in a pendulum swing. I'm very excited to where we're going.
It's definitely a good sign for sure. Getting back to the actual decision, let's break down how this decision came about and what it means for the average person. In the United States, we have different levels of courts. When a new law is passed, like Tennessee's SB 1, people who believe it violates their rights can challenge it in court. In this case, the challenge started at a district court, which is a trial court. That court looked at the law and initially thought it might be unconstitutional because it seemed to treat transgender individuals differently, suggesting it discriminated based on sex and transgender status, which is what Kristi's been saying. They believe that the law would likely not pass what's called intermediate scrutiny, a legal test where the government must show substantial reason for the law. They put a temporary stop to parts of the law, but it was still in effect. It was just parts of it. So then the case went up to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, and this higher court disagreed with the first court. They ruled that the Tennessee law didn't trigger heightened scrutiny, like intermediate scrutiny, and instead only needed to pass rational basis review. So rational basis review is a much easier legal test for a law to pass. It basically asks if there's any reasonable, legitimate government purpose of the law. And the appeals court found that the law did meet this easier test, allowing it to go back into effect. And then finally, the case reached the Supreme Court, our nation's highest court. And the Supreme Court's job at that point was to decide whether the Tennessee law truly violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which essentially guarantees that states cannot deny any person within its jurisdiction equal protection of the laws. The Supreme Court concluded that Tennessee's law prohibiting certain medical treatments for transgender minors is not subject to heightened scrutiny. This means that they didn't believe the law classified people in a way that required a very strong justification from the state. Instead, they applied the rational basis review test, and under that less strict standard, they found that the law does satisfy the requirement. And in plain terms, the Supreme Court determined that the state of Tennessee has a legitimate reason for enacting this law to protect minors, and therefore the law is constitutional and can remain in effect.
What you said is pretty much why one of the reasons I got behind it was because of the fact that they were trying to deceptively use the term transgender, not just sociologically and ideologically, but also legally as a way to try to get into the binary system to corrode it in order to bring in their ideological social construct redesign. I understand that. And for them to roadblock that legally was, I'm not going to say it's a fatal blow to the trans movement in its current shape or form, but it is a massive one. And that's one of the reasons why I fully support it and what they're doing legally. Absolutely. And it's a wonderful thing.
What do you think are the potential long-term impacts, both positive and negative, of this ruling on young people who are questioning their gender identity?
The negative impact from this is you're going to have a lot of people who are not truly understanding the whole trans issue, who are caught up in this, I like to say, social contagion. They're going to be very upset. They're going to be turned against their family. They're going to be turned against people in their community. They're going to see themselves as bigger victims. It's going to enrage them. And I think it's going to cause more dualism and separation coming from the propaganda coming out of the Rainbow Plantation, the far left aspect of this. And for that, it's pretty sad. I am very happy, though, the life's going to change. The direction is going to change the gender identity movement. And the conversation's going to open, like the one I tried to open up when I stood in front of Charlene Oliver. She's a Senate out of District 19 in Tennessee, went in front of the legislature when she liked to bring up the suicide rate of transgender youth. And that was one of her arguments. And I stood up before her, and I appreciate that. And they're going to fall back on the victimization card and double down on this 10 times a Sunday. But the truth is that my community is not able to speak about the fact that we're 25% more likely to abuse alcohol. We're 3 to 5 times more likely to use marijuana. We're 12.2 times more likely to use amphetamine and almost 10 times more likely to use heroin. And this is just a trans community alone going up against the rest of society. And that's for the Center for American Progress, if anybody wants a receipt on that. These are numbers which are astronomical and detrimental to my community. And a lot of it has to do with the culture that which we are brought within. You separate these children from these communities, and you bring them into this culture, it is thriving off sex, it's thriving off recreational drug use, it's thriving off that lifestyle, and you're bringing them down into a very dark world, a world that I escaped from. This is a world I know all too well, and this is where my passion for standing up for these kids actually begins. And I have a lot of friends I've lost along this journey who are trans or who were trans, let me say, who I carry in my heart, and I refuse to do them disgrace by not raising this issue to the forefront. And I brought that up, and I said, and she just rolled her eyes. They're not going to have that conversation. On top of that, the other aspect of this I brought up was the fact that, again, they were confusing gender dysphoria with transgender itself, again, the ideological trap. And when you're bringing in a progressive social engineering, social construct redesign of gender and sexuality under the guise of identity politics, you're going to have a big mess. And so those are the 2 points I brought up for her.
Thank you for doing that. I know you had said that you had supported this. So is that when you're talking about your advocacy for it?
Yes, I made sure I stood in front of my peers on the left and in front of the state legislature myself, and I stood up with the conservatives and let them know there are factions in the trans community that stand very openly with the conservatives on this stance. We may be censored. You may not hear a lot of our voices online because we are actively targeted for censorship. If you want, I will send you, after this is done, there's a piece of Breitbart that I did a few years ago. They intercepted from the American Journal Society emails going out to mainstream media outlets and social media outlets that were directing them to silence the voice of detransitioners, to silence the voice of trans medicalists like me, and to push the ideology in its place. Not only were they directing them to do so, they were actively funding it. So this has been, again, a social engineering project where a lot of deception was pursuant to the success. And like I said, I want to reiterate why I'm so excited about the Supreme Court decision is because it's starting to hit on the deception and break down a lot of their, let's say, the weaponization of the deception and the confusion.
What kind of support do you believe should be available for young people experiencing gender dysphoria, if not medical transition at a young age? What should be available to help them?
I think there should be counseling available. I have no problem with people having their own set of peers and their belief systems, things of that nature. They're going to have that regardless. But like I said earlier in the podcast, is I want to see a lot of federal funding shift over to the diagnostic aspect of this and to the mental health aspect of this. Help them understand, because again, we're dealing with two different beasts here. Are you gender dysphoric? Does that mean you feel like you're the opposite sex? Is that a medical condition? Or are you part of a belief system which believes that gender is a spectrum or something different, and you just fall upon that because it's a different sociological design that you've been taught? There's two totally different directions here. So when the two are together and conflated, you don't know where the kids think. The kids are just going to be messed, and they're just going to fall into that victimization mindset. And so I think it's important to have that therapy, to have that true understanding in that therapy. And I think it's important for parents to have their rights, to be able to teach their kids the ideology that they believe in. Is gender a social construct based on sex base, or is gender not? That is a adult decision, and that's a parental decision. That is not a decision for the government to make. That's not a decision for school to make. That's not a decision for other people. And so what I would like to see is parents having control over the ideological direction of their children regarding this.
There's a lot of emotional debate surrounding this topic, clearly. There are going to be people who are distressed. What message could you share?
I think that it's time for us within the trans umbrella, the community itself, to be completely honest and open with all of society. If we continue to let the far left run the direction of this movement, you can see where it's going to drive us completely off the cliff into rejection. We need to come to a table and we need to have an open conversation and be truthful with who we are. We need to separate the medical condition of gender dysphoria away from the ideology. We need to treat that in a way that's going to be best for every patient and individually, and separate that from the social conquest of what we're trying to do on the ideological end of the far left. There's a lot of us in the trans community that want nothing to do with that. That is your conquest. That's not ours. That is a belief system. It's an ideation that needs constant affirmation. And that's why when people don't affirm it, you feel like a victim. That's why you feel broken. You need to self-love, self-accept. Do not let that ideology take that away from you. Continue searching, finding yourself, and then you can be free. But if we can do that, we really want true equal rights in this country as trans people. What we need to do is we need to separate that medical condition from the ideology, recognize the ideology, be honest, everybody. This is an ideological belief system. It's an ideation, and we need to have that protected under separation of church and state. So we can have protections to be who we want to be and believe what we want to believe, but we're also going to have the limitations where we're not going to be able to invade the rest of society, harm them, and have the backlash come either. I can be friends with anybody. I have Muslim friends, I have Buddhist friends, I have Jewish friends, I have friends from all faiths, and I can go out and hang out with them on Friday night, and we can hang out, have a good time. I love them dearly. But I'm not going to get on my knees on Sunday and pray to their mosque or their church. Why? Because we have separation of church and state. I respect their American liberty to believe in what they want to believe. We cannot allow the far left aspect of the gender identity movement to take this medical condition, to hijack it, and continue to violate that free will and that liberty in other Americans. If we do so, as long as we do so, we are going to be an enemy to the majority of the people in this country. And if we're continuing to do so, we're never going to gain footing. We're only going to continue to keep rolling backwards.
I want to let the audience know, if they're not familiar with you, you're very well accepted in the MAGA community, and you proclaim yourself as MAGA. You identify as a conservative and stand with the conservative movement. You just happen to be who you are. How did you get involved with MAGA?
This is an important aspect because I don't want anyone to think that I'm high and righteous. No, I actually come from the gutter. I'm the warrior from the gutter of America that fought up backwards into MAGA. I was a far left social justice warrior. I come from the trans adult industry. And if you guys were ever behind closed doors in my bedroom, you'd all probably be horrified. I'm not going to lie about that. I've been very open about who I am as a person. And when I was a social justice warrior for transgender people, I was one of the original social media influencers for the movement. I'm talking between 2010 to 2015, 16 or so. I even ran New England's first trans adult strip club. I was heavily in the BDSM community and into what I call the dark side of the rainbow. And while I was there, I fell into the substance abuse. I fell into the lifestyle, and I ended up being pretty much red pilled when I decided to start working for the Rainbow Plantation. And when I understood what was going on regarding what I brought up earlier in the podcast regarding the rates of usage of substance abuse within my community, started ringing that bell, I became an enemy. And I eventually became an informant. And when I did, I pretty much had blue turn on me. I lost all my social media. I understood what shadow banning was in the instant. I became the pariah of the rainbow movement. And for safety, originally, I went into conservatism and eventually found myself in the MAGA movement. And as MAGA has been fighting the establishment regarding the influx of illegal substances and trafficking, especially within my community, I naturally fit with certain sects of that movement. And at that point, I also understood the social media manipulation and how they censored and took my voice, and it pissed me off. So I flipped a house, and I took about $80,000 of my own money, purchased a vehicle, and they were going to take my social media. I decided I was going to go on everybody else's, and I started traveling the country. 35 states in 10 years. I've been down on how many Trump rallies as one Trump's Front Row Joes. I've done the Walkway March of Brendan Straka, Straight Pride with Milo, different churches, different organizations, Purple for Parents, Moms for Liberty. I've gone around as someone who wasn't supposed to be there, as a walkaway, as iconoclastically Kristi was going in there trying to teach conservatives the social engineering aspects of the gender identity movement to help better protect American liberty. And I found along this journey that they were truly my family. They were my people. My community, I don't see transgender as my community. Again, I see that as a weaponized umbrella, which trying to appropriate me. Yeah, I have kidney disease too. Does that mean everybody in the world that has kidney disease is part of my community? No, I have gender dysphoria. It's a medical condition. And so I realized and understood that MAGA would adopt anybody who would stand on the line of equal rights for all Americans and stand and defend that. And that's what I have done. Whether it's too far right or too far left, I will fight anybody that's going to challenge that. When I want equal respect to equal American liberty. And among that, I've found nothing but love along my MAGA community. It's not just a few people here and there. This is, again, a journey of 10 years, traveling across 35 different states, intimately mingling and meet with people, and they become truly my family. MAGA is not a political movement for me. MAGA is family. It is something more. It's deeper. And I do love you all.
We love you right back. Is there anything that I haven't asked that you would like to add as a closing statement?
I just want to say thank you. Thank you to all of you who are standing up and who are really standing up to protect the kids, a woman's rights. Religious liberty is important, American liberty and free will. Know this is a good sector of the trans community that is actively standing behind you. I'm one that will stand openly with you. So just understand that we're in this together, and don't believe everything you're going to hear on social media. It is what it is. But I think we're in a good place now, much better than we were a year ago looking back. So hold on tight, and any way that I can stand with you guys, most certainly I will do so. Just look me up.
Thank you so much, Kristi.
Thank you for joining us today for From the Heart, Voice of a Conservative American Woman. Find us online at www.conservativeamericanwoman.com and anywhere your favorite podcasts are available.